What is up, YouTube? It's the ToneViking, and my new series is basically going to be on tone. I know, the ToneViking is talking about tone, but there's a lot to it, and I'm going to break it down into basically 6 areas. First off, the technique, the guitar, effects pedals, amps, speaker cabinets, mics, especially when you're recording and like going into a PA. All these things break down to make what is a guitarist tone, and I'm basically just going to talk about the technique and guitar today. So the very first thing, like if you had your favorite guitarist on stage and he just got done playing and you walked up with his same gear, same setup and played, chances are you won't sound anything like him. And that's because even though you have the same gear, the same settings, everything, part of tone is the technique. Your vibrato, how he slides into note, how he picks it. Is he sweep picking? Is he alternate picking? The type of pick he's using. Is he tapping? All these things make up part of the tone. How you play. You have a soft touch, hard touch. Hammer-ons are really articulated, or are they not? So that's one thing to think about when you talk about tone. The next thing is probably a huge part is the guitar, the type of guitar you're using. Let's start with probably the basic part of it is the strings. Without them, there's no guitar really. We're not playing anything. And there's mainly 2 types of strings here. We have what's called a nylon strings, which you'll see on classical guitars. They're basically a thick kind of plastic nylon. They're usually on guitars that have wider necks, so it's easier to finger pick. They have a really nice warm tone. They actually sound really good. The drawbacks with them is they go out of tune pretty easy with temperature change and playing and stretching out since they're plastic. Not a real big deal. They just have a very specific tone. I like them in certain situations. Your electric and acoustic guitars use a type of steel strings. They can be wound in different materials like bronze or nickel or whatever. Now, another type of string that I'm using here is a flat wound string. And basically, and we use this in jazz a lot. You also see this on upright basses. The lower strings are wound, but they're polished basically smooth, so that when you move across the neck, there's no squeaking versus a normal wound string. This is really good if you're doing a lot of walking chords and bass lines. If you're recording, that way you don't get any squeaking. Disadvantage to the flat wound strings is bending. They don't quite bend in tune very well. They're usually a thicker gauge string, which is good for tone, but not so much for bending and stuff like that. The next thing is when you've decided on the string that you're going to use on your guitar, is the size. Are you going to use a really thin string or a really thick string? So there's a trade-off with both. One, if you use a thick string, the tone, especially on the upper 3 strings, the G, B, and E strings, the tone is really thick. It's a really solid sounding sort of tone. The trade-off is that with a thick string becomes a higher tension on the neck, which means it's harder to press down. So you have to have a little stronger fingers. You can definitely get used to it. The trade-off, obviously, or the other option is a really light gauge string. So it's really easy to press down, all that stuff, easy to play. Shredders use the lightest gauge strings they can find usually. The trade-off is that the higher strings sound a little thin. So usually what we do is we do some other things with the EQ, the amp, and pedals to make the higher strings sound better. Just on their own, they're going to sound a little thin and kind of tinny, if you will. I usually use a light gauge string, fairly close. The other thing is if you go from a light gauge string to a heavy gauge string, you're going to have the neck adjusted. And we basically have a metal rod in most guitars called a truss rod, and it basically keeps the neck from folding forward. So you might have to turn it a little and adjust it back if you put on a really heavy gauge string. Might want to have somebody at a guitar shop do it for you if you're not sure how to do it. The next thing is action height, and by that I mean how far off the fretboard is the strings. And that can be a combination of two things. The bridge can be raised up, and the nut can have a high height to it. The advantage of this is acoustically, it's louder. Before amplifiers and all that, jazz players had huge actions on their guitar, really hard to play because you have to press down so far, but they were loud enough to play with a big band. So that's an option. So it's good sound. Might go out of tune a little bit because you're pressing the string down so far that you're actually kind of bending it out of pitch. If you have the action too low, then what happens is the string buzzes on the frets and you get a very buzzy sounding guitar. So you want to get the perfect height for you and get used to it. The next thing, the body of the guitar, the shape of it, the wood it's made from, all like the build quality. Is it a solid piece of wood? Is it a hollow body? Is it an acoustic where it's got everything on it, where it's only going to play acoustically? All these things affect the sound. The nut of the guitar. So the nut up here holds the strings up top. The material it's made out of will affect your tone. I know some players prefer a brass nut. This one I think is bone or plastic. You can have even wood ones and stuff like that too. So it all affects the sound. The opposite end is the bridge, and that's sitting down here. On an arch top like I have, it's a floating bridge, much like a cello, violin. The strings hold it in place. If I took it off, it'd just fall off. So some guitars will have set bridge. The materials it's made from, like I have, I just recently put this bridge on, and it's from bone. And I had a wood one on here, and the wood one was a little duller sound, and this is a little more brighter, a little more acoustic sound. Electric guitars will have some sort of metal bridge, obviously. All that's going to affect your sound also. The next thing is when we get into electric guitars is the pickups. You basically have maybe three types of pickups here. We've got what's called a single coil pickup. You'll see these on the Stratocasters and stuff like that, where it's just a single one. They usually have a high output, but they're a little noisy usually. And then we get the invention of what's a humbucker, like you'll see on here, which is two single coils wound together, creating a humbucker, meaning there's no hum. It's a very quiet, reliable pickup. The other type is a Pezio pickup. That's usually under a bridge on an acoustic guitar so that you can amplify it, and it sounds very acoustic. The probably the more advanced type then is what we call a hexaphonic pickup. And it's got little humbucking pickups under each string, and this enables you to play synth sounds. It gives you a lot of options because each string can have a different sound or a different volume level, which is very cool. These are more advanced pickups that you'd use maybe with a Roland, like VG99 or some of their other stuff, or plug it into your computer to use. The other thing is the volume and tone knobs. So each guitar will have some sort of volume and tone knob. On mine you can see I have 4 knobs here because I have 2 pickups, and each pickup has a volume and a tone. And basically the volume is what it sounds like. It just decreases the volume. The tone knob actually reduces the treble basically. And as you turn it down, you're going to get less full, like you get the full spectrum, you're going to get a little more just to the low end. A little tip for jazz guitar players is we turn this almost all the way off, and then as we play a chord, we just kind of roll it on until you just kind of hear some of that treble come back in. Might be 1 or 2 numbers or whatever before you get it, and then that's usually a pretty good jazz sound. The other thing is when you're playing, choosing what pickup you're playing out of. You can select the front, the back. Some guitars will have a middle or some combination of pickups. Typically the one closest to the neck here, we call this the rhythm pickup. And it's exactly what it is. Usually when you're playing rhythm, it's a great one because it's not very trebly sounding. It's very good for rhythm. And then when you're soloing, we usually put it on the back pickup because it's real trebly and it cuts through if you're soloing. at least in rock and stuff. Jazz, you're always going to use the front pickup pretty much. The other thing with the guitar is the volume and tone knobs are basically a pot underneath them there, and the type of pot you have creates a resistant, and that affects the tone. So the different types of pots you can put in these will also affect your tone, just little things like that. That's kind of the basics of it. Play around with it. Some guitars will only have 2 knobs, a volume and a tone, and it affects everything. So no matter what pickup you have, it's always going to be that setting. It could be just, you could have it set on the front pickup and then switch it to the back pickup, and it's still going to be that volume and tone knob for at the same setting. That's it. So that's my basic little start on tone. We'll talk about effects pedals next week, amps and speaker cabinets and mics, and then eventually I'll just show you tones of famous people, how to get Hendrix's sound on this song or Van Halen, and we'll try to get you close. Obviously, a lot of it, there's a lot more to it than just amp settings and EQs and all that. As always, feel free to rate, comment, and subscribe, and make sure you stay out of trouble.